Ron Costa, broadcasting live in the Mappable USA studios, where we put you on the map. And folks, we are going to continue talking blockchain today. We're going to kind of take it from a different angle that maybe not a lot of people even think about. But in order to do that, let's bring in Vicky Hachmala from the World Token Market. Vicky, how are you today?
I'm excellent today, Ron. Another excellent, beautiful day in Vegas, and we have a very different guest on today, and I can't wait to talk to him. We're going to talk about a completely different subject.
Yeah, so let's waste no more time here, and let's bring on Thomas Cox from Strong Block. Thomas, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Great. So, yeah, it was really nice. We went to Blockchain Week last week over at the Cosmopolitan and met you and listened to your panel discussion and your presentation. Thought it was really, really interesting. And I'm glad you were taking the time to be on the show today and talk to our audience about what you guys are doing.
Thank you. Yeah, so there's two things that I think would make sense to talk about. First would be blockchain governance, which is my personal specialty, and then perhaps a little bit about my company's work, StrongBlock, and what it is that folks can use StrongBlock to do.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. And you know, later on in the podcast, I think we're going to have to maybe call you the Godfather of Governance, right? Isn't that what you'd like to be called? I love that line. That was so funny.
Yes. Well, I decided a while ago that I wanted to deserve the title, and so I was going to have to raise my game and
yes,
do whatever work was required to be worthy of it, and then whether people decide to call me that, it's up to them.
Well, I think you earned the title after I listened to your presentation at the Crypto World Blockchain Conference last week. You got it.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes. And before we get into the meat of the whole thing, maybe you could give our audience a little bit of a background on yourself and how you got to the point now where you're kind of concentrating on blockchain.
Yeah, absolutely. I graduated from the University of Chicago with a degree in psychology. And figured I'll never use psychology, right? It was just an interesting major. It was nice and broad. I didn't know what I was going to do with myself, maybe be a journalist. And I got sucked into computers. I moved to California thinking I might be a freelance writer. And Oracle Corporation was doubling every year, and they were hiring people like mad. It was this great boom in relational databases in the late 80s. And so I got hired, and I spent several years at Oracle learning about relational systems. It really appealed to kind of the math geek in me. I was on the math team in high school, so it twigged that part of my brain. And I got to think very rigorously and very methodically about how do you take real-world problems and represent them accurately and effectively in database systems so that you can support the real world and not abstract it in such a way that your database loses touch with. It's a perfectly pure database. It's got nothing to do with the real world. You don't want that. So that was a really good discipline, a really good experience for me. And I got to work in the relational database field for over a decade, including working at PricewaterhouseCoopers and at IBM Global Services. And that was terrific. And then I was ready for a change. I switched over to studying leadership. There's this concept of how do teams work and how do you lead a team and what does that even mean? In part because it turns out I was really bad at it, and it upset me because I thought I was good. And then to be smacked in the face with how bad you were, it's like, well, doggone it, I'm smart, why am I not good? And it turns out that leadership has a lot to do with empathy and things utterly unrelated to the math team or relational database skills. So I taught myself empathy through a bunch of practices involving things like improvisational theater and whatnot. And so that was very growthful for me as a person. It also made me a really excellent leader, as it turns out. And now I'm able to teach people what the skills are to lead, which then brought me right back into technology. I got hired into the blockchain world in August of 2017, just as the Block One $4 billion ICO was ramping up. I got to work at Block One for a while, and I was their vice president of product. And everybody else was a much better technologist than me, which is perfectly appropriate. What that let me do was focus on the one area that nobody wanted to touch, which was governance. We had some thoughts on it. Dan Larimer, who's brilliant, had some very great insights on that, but there was nobody but me to take it to its final form before it was released in GitHub to the public to do what they wanted to do with it. And as I realized, I spent 9 months working there thinking, gosh, everybody must know more about governance than me. Why do I feel so stupid? And I'm scouring the internet, and I'm looking at the Ethereum folks who really blazed a lot of trails here, trying to figure out what do they know that I need to know. And at some point, it finally dawned on me that nobody knows this stuff.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that I couldn't find the website that was going to lay it all out for me. It's, no one has made it yet. It's changed now in the last roughly 12 months because a whole lot of folks have come to the realization I was coming to, which is that without governance, blockchains become very hard to work with, very unmanageable, with the sole exception of Bitcoin, which has very, very light, minimalistic governance by design, because that's why it was designed the way it was designed. I can get into detail if you like. But anything that's going to be more user experience focused and not simply designed for resilience and redundancy and resistance to the nation states of the world. If you wanted to build a business blockchain, for instance, man, you're going to need governance right away. And by now you're thinking to yourself, so he's using this word governance. What does that even mean? So I better define that term. Governance can be, I'll just define it this way, is how I define it in the blockchain context. It's decision making. It's the carrying out of the decision that you made. And then it's tweaking the rules around decision making. And it's specifically decision making and decision execution in a collective, a group of people or organizations who all have some sort of common purpose, or they're lumped together somehow, geography, interest, they're in business together, whatever it is. And so they have to work together. They're forced by this, whatever the circumstances, to cooperate. But they're having a hard time getting to unanimous agreement. And so the easiest thing to do when you can't get to unanimity is you just give up. It's like, well, not enough people are agreeing, and we don't want anybody to be unhappy, so we'll just not decide.
Yeah.
And you'll see that a lot in small family-owned businesses or certain clubs and things. When you get beyond a certain size and there's not enough homogeneity and everybody's already agreeing, that things just kind of shut down. And I guess that's okay for a club, but if you've got a business-oriented blockchain, you cannot lock up like that. You can't freeze up. You've got to respond to the world. You've got to respond to changing legislation. You've got to respond to changing technology, changing business needs. So if not choosing to do nothing isn't an option, which it's not for most of us, and you can't get to unanimous, which can be very harder and harder as you get more people, and as their interests diverge. So what's left? Well, what's left is this process called governance, which often involves voting, but it's not required to have voting. And it involves things like negotiation and side deals and, log rolling and all of the messy stuff that humans have been doing since the first hunter-gatherer groups developed language, a million years ago. And in the blockchain case, you have to have some kind of governance process for anything you don't already have fixed and final code for. So, yeah, you can make blocks. Yeah, you can agree on the content of blocks. Yeah, you can coordinate the ongoing running of things. But as soon as you have to fix a bug, which I promise you didn't anticipate. If you'd anticipated it, there wouldn't have been a bug. So here's a bug. We need a patch. We got to roll it out. Who's doing what when? We have to coordinate, all of us. If you don't coordinate, you're going to fork off and you're no longer part of the group. And you need a mechanism for proposing the change, for discussing it, for identifying who's even in the conversation and is allowed to have an opinion. Because the last thing you want is your hacker collective who's trying to destroy your chain, and they're pretending to be friendly and recommending a patch that actually makes things worse, a patch that they wrote that's got the Trojan horses in it. I mean, you've got to think these things through.
No doubt, yeah.
And so the governance process is really how you steer the ship through the fog. It's how you handle the unknown, which all of us have to handle all the time. And so a blockchain that isn't, something as minimalist as Bitcoin, if it's a business-oriented blockchain, you absolutely have to face the unknown. You've got to make decisions. You've got to make them in a way that everyone agrees is a legitimate way to move. And if you don't have legitimacy, people don't trust it. The whole enterprise falls apart. So being able to do that,
every organization, whatever you are, whether you're governmental or private, every organization has to have governance or governing rules and regulations, because you don't want everybody in your organization to recreate the wheel. You want to create the governing documents that reflect the strategy of the person that created the organization. They set up, this is what's going to happen when this happens, so when it happens, nobody's sitting there wondering, what should I do, and let's figure it out now. It's already set up for you. That's how organizations run smoothly, and without that, you're in chaos.
Vicki, you are so right. And what I have to point out is that a lot of blockchain work has been done by anarcho-capitalist types who don't work and play well with others and don't believe in hierarchy and are deeply suspicious of anything that looks like structure. And yet they've created this technology that absolutely requires collective action.
Absolutely.
Great funny ironies of our time. And so, if you come from a traditional background, a non-blockchain background, a business background, you're used to, there's a hierarchy inside the company, and there's governance with the board and the shareholders, and none of this seems weird or surprising to you. But blockchain technology has largely not been set up to be well governed. And one of my proof points of this is the Ethereum mainnet. They don't know how to govern themselves. They don't have a process. They don't have an agreement. They don't have any methods. In fact, they had a massive multi-day stakeholder meeting last summer about Ethereum governance, and I was so excited that they were going to publish their minutes, and I was going to learn all kinds of great things from them because they've been doing it for much longer than I had. And I read the minutes of the meeting, the articles and things that were published afterwards, and their big takeaway was that governance was important and that they needed to figure out who their stakeholders were and how to talk to them. And I'm thinking, you're serious. You spent 2 days figuring that out. I could have given that to you in 5 minutes. So,
my gosh.
And so Ethereum, it isn't simple enough to get by with Bitcoin's minimalist governance, but it's not. It's only second generation. They hadn't really encountered these challenges yet. We're just learning about them now. So they hadn't figured out, as we're starting to, it's not a criticism of them, it's just describing the struggle they're having, is if you don't know who your stakeholders are, if you don't know how to communicate with them, if you don't know what makes a decision a legitimate decision, if you haven't written that down and agreed to it, and there's some consensus and legitimacy around that, you very quickly splinter. You very quickly have gridlock or schisms and forks forming, kind of like the Baptist church in North America, which likes to split off. Anyway, the Baptist in the audience, but you guys know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so humans like to do that, right? And so if you've got a blockchain in your future, you need to be thinking about, does this thing have governance built in, or do I have easy access to some sort of governance structure, even a simple one that will let me make basic decisions like how to upgrade governance so that if it needs to be more sophisticated, we can do that, and I'm not gridlocked and stuck like the poor Ethereum folks are. And that's what I've been working on at StrongBlock and also with the IEEE.
Well, and you're right, because of all organizations, blockchain, of all businesses, blockchain, and tokens and cryptocurrency and all of that absolutely requires governance, because there's such a multitude of people involved in it that without governance you go back to chaos, and chaos is the last thing you want in any kind of organization, because you're never going to go anywhere. You're always going to be stuck in the mud because nobody made the decision, nobody knows how to make the decision, and mostly they don't even know that a decision needs to be made because they can't see that there's a problem because they haven't looked into the future. It's where it goes back to what you were saying earlier, that's where empathy comes in. You have to be able to anticipate, figure out what might happen, when it might happen, what might cause it, and then how to resolve it, and who's going to resolve it, and what you need to be able to resolve it. Otherwise, you're never going to go into the future. You'll always be stuck wherever you started.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. So I will share with you a quick sort of mental model. So I mentioned the three layers. There's making the decision, there's carrying out the decision, and then there's going back and tweaking the rules by which decisions get proposed and made and carried out. Right? There's sort of following the Constitution and then amending the Constitution, if you will. Or Congress passes a law which sets policy, but then the executive has to carry out the policy, to execute it, hence the executive. But then you might say, well, we want to change not the policy, but the way the policy gets made, which is a structural change, right? Constitutional amendment, if you will. And so having something in place that lets you do those three things is crucial. And that informed our design with Strongblock. If you start reading on the internet about governance, you'll almost universally run into corporate governance stuff exclusively. So if you search on blockchain governance, you will probably run into a whole series of arguments back and forth between people who say you should have on-chain or off-chain governance as if there were a choice. And the reality is you need parts of the governance on-chain and parts of it off-chain. And it's very simple what you want, right? Let's say you're going to vote. Well, a blockchain is a great place to hold a vote and count votes. It's a great place to register people as having a stake or some sort of standing. It's a great place to enforce rules with smart contracts, like there's a voting period if you have to vote between Monday and Wednesday or whatever it is. And some of the other, just the mechanics of carrying out the vote. But what you cannot put on chain is the discussion of which way should I vote. Or, well, if I support your proposal, let's say I've got a large stake here, and maybe I can swing it, but I don't really like your proposal very much. It doesn't really help me. It actually maybe hurts me a little bit. What are you going to do for me? And we may have to make some sort of side arrangement. I'll support your stuff, you'll support my stuff, and then we can all move together. And that happens all the time in business, right? I want more timely deliveries, which means you're going to have more trucks on the road. Well, it's a pure cost to you. So am I going to pay you more? Or am I going to do something else to make your life easier? Or am I just trying to beat you up and threaten to dump you if we kick the equivalent of a carrier? So these kinds of negotiations, having a smart contract and a blockchain somewhere does nothing for you in that realm. But as soon as you have a proposal and you're ready to vote, blockchains are extremely useful. So you want, I'd say roughly half on, half off chain, and we've done that with Strongblock by creating a number of on-chain governance elements to support without presuming that we're going to do things that can only be done face-to-face or human-to-human. So that's the first thing I want to think about is finding the right support. When you find a blockchain technology you want to use, look for those pieces of code that will help you with governance, but don't believe somebody who tells you that they've got all on-chain governance all the time and it's all automated. They're fooling themselves or fooling you. That's my first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is if you're getting into business with blockchain, you're almost certainly looking at some sort of consortium of multiple businesses. That's because blockchains are wonderful at reducing friction between entities. It makes it so much easier to do business with somebody when the code that's going to run between us is immutable on a blockchain. You can inspect it. You can see if it's been altered or not. If we have on-chain escrow that is deterministic and highly trustworthy, you can do deals, and people are doing deals today, all across the globe in seconds using the shared source of truth that blockchain can provide. And that's wonderful. And as we see more and more people use blockchain, I just read today that Coca-Cola is running $21 billion a year through their new blockchain that lets all of their different partners and divisions talk to one another. turns out when you get to a certain size and certain complexity, your systems become overwhelming, and they don't talk to each other very well, and they built a blockchain backbone to lash together all the information, much as Walmart did with its food trust, and much as Maersk has done with TradeLens, and much as Marco Polo wants to do with finance. That having a fairly simple cross-organization data store does an enormous amount to reduce the confusion that creeps in, where you say, well, I sent you the thing, did you get it? And the answer is, what thing?
Right.
And then people are on the phone trying to talk to each other and looking at their screens and trying to debug why your system and my system are two different versions of reality. And it's like, well, what if we had one version of reality we all shared? And blockchain is a brilliant solution for that when used correctly. As soon as you get in bed with another company, as soon as you start having a shared source of truth with somebody else, any changes to that blockchain are fundamentally threatening to you. So any change to that blockchain has got to be something that is done very, very carefully through a trusted governance process and not willy-nilly, oh, but wait, you can't have no changes. We're back to a situation where unanimity is hard, but you can't choose not to do things.
Well, and it stands to reason, too, that you're not going to get companies like Coca-Cola or Walmart or any kind of company at that level to trust blockchain if there is no sense of governance, because they're not going to touch it because of the trust value and the trust situation. If you don't know what you're doing, why should I trust you to do it with me?
Yes. Yeah, and just as you can't have a blockchain that's too easy to change, then it's just a centralized database and it's hackable and it's hard to trust something that's too easy to change. But if it's utterly unchangeable, it gets overtaken by events and stops being useful. And that's where
there has to be a balance.
The concept of there needs to be a balance, and governance is your path forward. And I could, go on at great length, and I have gone at great length. I've spent over 2 years on this topic. But let's just say that you must have a good governance solution in place, and if you're looking to get into a blockchain future, start looking for the governance story behind the solution that you're looking at.
And it makes the whole picture. Because a person can create a blockchain and deal with the technology involved in that process, it doesn't mean that they even have considered or understand the importance of governance, because that's totally outside their mindset. But if you don't combine the two and create a somewhat symbiotic situation, nobody is going to want to play with you, because the people that understand big business, where your end user is, need and understand governance, but the technology people who create it don't have a clue, and you're never going to get together. And I think that blockchain is a scary enough situation for most of the world out there, and it's going to be even more scary if there's no specific rules, specific governing situations that are set down that say this is what's going to happen when this happens, and this is what's going to happen when this is triggered. It remains scary, and nobody wants to touch it. So governance is the road to making everybody comfortable to deal with something that's so brand new and world-changing.
Yeah, and I'll furthermore add, one of the ways we know that the lack of governance is a problem is how many different proofs of concept have been created throughout corporate America. Hundreds and hundreds, thousands of them have been made, and very few have been scaled up. And
that's right.
One of my colleagues in the greater blockchain space, a guy named Stephen Rogers from IBM, summed it up by saying, without governance, you cannot scale. You cannot scale these things up beyond old proof of concept toy application into something real and that runs in production and solves real problems for people without governance. And he said that, and it rings completely true for me.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And Thomas, getting back to what you said a little bit before in the podcast, you were talking about how a lot of the players in blockchain, sometimes they don't really like to play well amongst each other, et cetera. And when you're talking about governance and setting rules and standards, what is the enforcing power on this? And what if people don't want to play by the government's rules, the rules made by the governance process?
Right. Well, you've got a couple of choices. One is you leave. The other is you persuade people. The other is you persuade people.
Go make your own blockchain.
Yeah, you go and make your own. I mean, how many times has Bitcoin been forked? How many times has Ethereum been forked? People are always making copies of these things, and often not as popular as the original, but that's okay. And certainly in a business context, you should definitely say, is there a consortium agreement, a legal agreement that gives us the ability to sue each other for breach of contract and so on? Does the consortium rules have any rules in it about how we're going to run this darn blockchain in terms of new business rules or new technical changes or just overall, steering committee? You need three. Basically, you're going to need three committees. I'm sorry that the future is committees. It's just how it's going to be. You need a steering committee. You need some kind of business rules group to make agreements on the business level, new workflows, new definitions. You're going to need a technical committee to actually write code and do things at the bit and byte level. And that's at a minimum. You might also want to change control team and so forth. There's been a lot of really good work in this area written by the DTCC and by Press Waterhouse, my former employer, and Accenture. And has also done, I think, some excellent work in researching this and publishing things. However, I think what you'll find within the next few months is the best place to find blockchain governance information will become a new IEEE group, which I've been lobbying for, and it's already passed its first vote. In January of 2020, we'll have the next vote on whether to form it. It goes by the acronym P2145. I don't know what that, I think it doesn't stand for anything. It's just how they identify committees in IEEE. The P2145 is going to be dedicated to creating standards for blockchain governance. It'll be the first of its body of its kind in the world to create a standard through a standards-making body and standards-making process. And our first step is going to be to harmonize language and a clear lexicon of what do you call things, and how do you talk about these. And I've been named the chair of this potential group. It's not a real group until it's voted in. And we're already having study group meetings to work towards that standard. And I found, for instance, there's a wonderful group out of Europe called INATPA that's doing great things in blockchain governance standards. The Wharton Business School convened something called the Wharton Crypto Governance Workshop in July. They invited me to, and they've done tremendous work. And they've allowed me to help them with that. And there's an interesting mashup between MIT, Harvard, Oxford, and one or two other schools on something called the Meta Governance Project, which had originally, as far as I can tell, had nothing to do with blockchain. They were looking at massively multiplayer online games that were very immersive and that people would be able to self-organize and create their own guilds or cliques or whatever, and that they would want to govern themselves. And they were going to come up with portable tools for governing virtual worlds. And they very quickly twigged to the fact that blockchain is an interesting area. And so I'm talking to them about, so what are these tools you've got and how do we see them? And, let's pull you guys into the process as well. So there's a lot of great parallel work being done here to solve this problem. And I have one offer to make, and that is, if you would like to get your own hands on a blockchain and look at some simple blockchain governance options to try and get your feet wet or to move yourself, to whatever your next level is, I encourage you to go strongblock.io and create a free blockchain for yourself. The single node blockchain, good for 30 days. It's totally free. It'll be up in 3 or 4 minutes, and you can go straight to the marketplace and install governance tools to allow you to do things like vote on issues, register people to vote, and then you can invite your friends in, make accounts for them, and you guys can build software and govern your chain immediately. And I think that makes us possibly the first platform in the world that can do that.
Yeah, that is really interesting because and folks out there, it's strongblock.io. It's not .com, right? It's a .io extension, and when you go there, you can create a free account. And I think this is really amazing. So you're saying when you can make your own blockchain. I know the website says something like create your free blockchain in less than the time it takes to get a latte.
Yes.
Well, these days that might not be true because a lot of people stand in line at Starbucks to order crazy lattes, right? There's always soy. It takes like 14 words before they get the order out. But anyway, it happens really quickly, and now we can use this, create our own blockchain, and put that application on kind of like a network of other people.
Yeah. Now, right now it's single node, but we're adding multi-node meshing. We're adding the ability to bring in more and more people and more and more organizations, so that you go from really a development environment, because a single node chain is really just for development, which is what we're hosting right now. And by now, I mean the 6th of November now. In a few weeks or months, you will be able to do multi-node. And at which point, you really better have your governance dialed in as soon as you start bringing more people in. We encourage you and give you the hooks to do things like have an upfront agreement with everybody on how we're going to govern ourselves. And they have to literally agree and sign a statement on the chain saying they agree to those rules as they joined. And that's a pretty powerful onboarding, right? That helps.
Yeah, the whole concept of this governance is really really interesting, I think. And like we started off the show by saying, I don't think a lot of people even give it a thought at the start, but just from the scalability aspect of it, it's unbelievably important. And I think the points you're making on the show today are really, really valid and should really get people thinking a lot.
Yep.
Well, yeah, and it's any business that wants to be successful has to do this if they want to go into the future, especially with blockchain. And governance is kind of like just a contract. You have a contract with somebody that says, I'm going to do this and you're going to do that, and together we're going to do this and it's going to be wonderful. But if you don't have the contract that spells it out, or a governing sense of documents or plan that spells out, this is what's going to happen, this is what I'm going to do, this is what you're going to do, this is what we're going to do together, this is what's going to happen when something comes up, and this is how we're going to adapt to that. It's like I said, you're never going to go anywhere. You're never going to be a success because you will be stuck in trying to figure it out when it's happening, and you'll never do that because then you have too many fingers in the pot and nobody can make a decision.
Yeah, the worst thing in the world is to have an emergency and have no agreement on how to handle emergencies.
Right.
And so your absolute minimum governance needs to be, if we all agree there's an emergency, then we will do the following thing. That the first three people whose accounts were created become the executive team, and they get to make decisions for the rest of us, period.
Right, because you don't want everybody trying to solve a problem, because you will never solve the problem, because everybody wants their idea to be the one that everybody adopts. And so you're arguing about whose idea is best instead of zeroing in on what the problem is that you're trying to resolve. And that's what governance, I keep wanting to say governing documents, but it's governance. That's what it's for. It's the steps to take when something happens that's beyond the norm.
Yep. And at the very, very least, you've got to have an agreement on, if we know we need to do something together and we don't have an existing process for it, here's the process we will use, or here's the process we'll use to create a process. Because if you start with nothing, people will fight like cats and dogs over what process to use or what structure to create, and they will never ever get to agreement, and you will freeze up, and it'll be horrible. So
right, and businesses dissolve and fall by the wayside just because they didn't have it set up on what to do when a problem comes up, and it's a basic concept of. Because no business, I don't care what you're doing or what your project, what your widget, what your service, if you don't have a path to follow, predetermined and preset, then a problem comes up and everything falls apart, and nothing happens, and there goes a company by the wayside just because they weren't fortuitous enough to plot it out in the beginning.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair.
And that's a sad thing.
And I would say that don't think that blockchain's not for you. If I'm making it sound complicated or scary, I'm sorry. It is a little complicated. It is a little scary, but the opportunities here are huge.
Oh, absolutely. I truly believe that blockchain is the future. The future may not be tomorrow or next year, but the future in 5 years, 6 years, and definitely 10 years, blockchain is going to be everywhere in every aspect of every person's life. And now is the building time. Now is the infancy when you want to fine-tune all of these things so down the road it works great. I mean, the Internet started off this way. Even computers started off this way, where it was chaos at the beginning, but now we can't live without them. Nobody can understand what a life would be like without a computer, without a cell phone, even without a microwave oven, which was something that was way beyond the norm. Who's going to use that? But now we can't live without it. But they all are successful because they had governance in at the beginning that led them into the future.
Yeah, and I would furthermore say that the future is going to be consortia. It's going to be more and more cooperation, more and more shared sources of truth, uniting industries. And I think that's going to be ultimately better customer service and more transparency and probably a much higher quality of goods and services, the ability to detect fraudulent products, the ability to weed out unsafe products from the marketplace will go way, way up. And I think that's going to be good for humanity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Thomas, if someone's listening to this podcast right now, they may have some questions and may want to contact you. How would they get a hold of you? What's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, best way to reach me is by email, thomas.cox@strongblock.io, or private message me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is T like Tango, B like Bravo, COX, TB Cox.
All right, great. Yeah, we'll put that all in the show notes and everything. And when's your next trip? When you come out to Vegas for the next conference or something? Anything happening?
I don't want to go to Vegas next, but I'm leaving the house at 3 a.m. tomorrow morning to go to the Caribbean for a multi-million-dollar project that my company just signed with a very large beverage maker to bring them onto the blockchain. They're putting in an ERP system that's going to be state-of-the-art.
Excellent. Score for you, Tom.
Yeah, that's exciting.
As well.
Yeah. Very good. So listen, Thomas, thank you so much for taking the time and being on our podcast today and bringing this information to our audience. It was really interesting stuff. And like I said, it's something that maybe people may not even realize it now, but they're going to have to talk governance eventually. And who better than the Godfather of Governance. So I once again, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
Yep. And Vicki, thanks for co-hosting the show with me. This was great. I really enjoyed it. You're listening to the Mappable USA podcast over at mappableusa.com. If you go to our homepage, you could scroll down and see all our syndication sources, which we keep getting more and more of them. We just got about 3 more, Vicki, the other day. You know that. And there's also a place on the website for a guest tab. If you want to be a guest on the show like Thomas was today, just fill that out. We'll see what we can do about getting you on the show. But in the meantime, thank you very much for listening, for subscribing, for all your support. And we'll be back at you next week with another Mappable USA podcast. Have a great week, everyone. Take care.